The Atlantic roared beyond the cliffs of Seaview Haven, a sprawling retirement home perched on Maine's rugged coast, where salt air mingled with the scent of pine on a crisp November evening. Tonight, the sky blazed with streaks of green and purple, the aurora borealis, a rare visitor this far south, painting the horizon in a dance of light that drew residents from their bingo boards and rocking chairs to the wide veranda. Among them stood Margaret Peggy Sullivan, a spry 72-year-old with a mane of silver hair and a walker she wielded like a scepter, her sharp tongue as famed as her sharp memory. She'd lived here for a decade, the unofficial queen of Seaview, knowing every creak in the floorboards and every secret in the halls, or so she thought. As the northern lights pulsed, a shadow moved through the crowd, a figure Peggy didn't recognize, a woman whose quiet presence carried a weight that tugged at forgotten corners of her mind. Before the night was out, that shadow would pull Peggy and two others into a storm of memory and mystery, reshaping their twilight years in ways none could foresee. Peggy leaned on her walker, her eyes narrowed against the aurora's glow. The veranda buzzed with murmurs. Old Mr. Jenkins muttering about aliens, widow Elsie Tate clutching her rosary, the new nurse, Clara Henshaw, snapping photos with her phone. At 38, Clara was a newcomer to Seaview, her brisk efficiency a contrast to the residents' leisurely pace. She'd taken the night shift to escape a stalled life in Portland, finding the home's quirks, Peggy's barbs included, oddly comforting. Tonight she herded the crowd like a shepherd, her voice bright. "Look at that sky. Never seen anything like it. Let's get closer to the rail." Peggy snorted, adjusting her shawl. "Closer? I've seen better shows in my sleep, girl. Don't need to trip over my own feet for lights." Clara grinned, undeterred, but Peggy's gaze snagged on the stranger, a woman in her late 60s. Her frame slight beneath a faded denim jacket, her gray hair braided loosely down her back. She stood apart, hands in her pockets, staring at the sky with an intensity that prickled Peggy's skin. Who's this now? She wondered, her curiosity flaring. Seaview wasn't a tourist trap. New faces meant deliveries or death notices, and this one fit neither. "Who's that?" Peggy muttered to Elsie, nodding toward the woman. Elsie squinted, her rosary beads clicking. "Dunno. Ain't staff. Too old. Visitor, maybe?" Peggy frowned. Visitors checked in, signed logs. Clara would know. She waved the nurse over, her tone sharp. "Henshaw, you got a stray here. Who's she?" Clara glanced at the woman, her brow furrowing. "No idea. She's not on the list. Must have slipped in with the crowd. I'll check." Before Clara could move, the woman turned, her eyes locking with Peggy's. A jolt shot through Peggy. Recognition, faint but insistent, like a memory buried under decades of dust. She gripped her walker tighter, her voice low. "Hold off, Clara. I know her. Somehow." The woman approached, her steps slow but deliberate, her face weathered yet soft, like driftwood smoothed by the sea. "Margaret Sullivan?" she asked, her voice a quiet rasp. Peggy's breath caught. Nobody called her Margaret anymore, not since her husband passed 20 years back. "Who's asking?" she snapped, her defenses up. "Ellen Carver," the woman replied, her gaze steady. "We knew each other once. Long time ago." Peggy's mind raced, sifting through faded names and faces. Ellen Carver didn't ring a bell, but that look, that voice, tugged at something deep. Clara hovered, sensing the tension, while Elsie muttered a prayer under her breath. "Don't recall an Ellen," Peggy said, her tone gruff. "You sure you've got the right old bat?" Ellen smiled faintly, a flicker of something, sorrow maybe, in her eyes. "I'm sure. It was 1968, Portland. You were Peggy O'Neill then. We worked the cannery together. Summer girls, elbow deep in fish guts." Peggy froze, the memory crashing in like a rogue wave. Portland, 1968. She'd been 16, wild and restless, slinging fish with a crew of girls to earn pocket money. Ellen's face sharpened in her mind, younger, freckled, laughing over a spilled crate. They'd been thick as thieves that summer until— Peggy's jaw tightened. "You left," she said, her voice low. "After the fire. Never said goodbye. Just gone." Ellen nodded, her hands tightening in her pockets. "I had to. Things got complicated. But I'm back now. For a reason." Clara stepped closer, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "Ladies, maybe we take this inside. It's getting cold and—" She stopped as Elsie gasped, pointing toward the cliff edge. "Look, someone's out there." The crowd turned, murmurs rising. A figure stood near the railing, a man hunched against the wind, his coat flapping like a sail. Peggy squinted, recognizing the stoop. "That's Charlie Dunn. Damn fool's gonna fall if he's not careful." Charlie, 78, was Seaview's resident tinkerer, a wiry ex-fisherman who'd lost his wife to cancer and his patience to age. He'd been quieter lately, muttering about old boats and older regrets. Clara darted toward him, her voice sharp. "Mr. Dunn, come back from there. It's slippery." Charlie waved her off, his gruff voice carrying, "Leave me be. I'm fine." But Ellen moved too, her stride surprisingly swift, reaching him just as Clara did. Peggy watched, her curiosity spiking. Why'd Ellen care? "Charlie," Ellen called, her tone softer now. He turned, his weathered face creasing in confusion, then shock. "Ellen? Carver? That you?" His voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and something deeper. Pain, maybe. Peggy's walker clattered as she hobbled closer, Elsie trailing behind. "You two know each other?" she demanded, her eyes darting between them. Ellen nodded, helping Clara guide Charlie back from the edge. "We do. From Portland. Same summer." Charlie's hands shook as he gripped the rail, his gaze locked on Ellen. "You disappeared after the cannery burned. Left us all wondering." "I had to," Ellen said, her voice trembling now. "The fire. It wasn't an accident. I saw who said it, Jimmy Tate, drunk and mad about a pay cut. I told the bosses, but they hushed it up, paid me to leave, threatened worse if I stayed." Peggy's breath hitched. Jimmy Tate, Elsie's cousin, dead 30 years now. She glanced at Elsie, whose rosary stopped clicking, her face pale. "You're saying Jimmy burned the place? Killed 2 girls?" Peggy's voice was steel, memories of that summer flooding back, smoke, screams, the stench of charred wood. Ellen nodded, her eyes glistening. "I couldn't prove it. Nobody would listen. I ran. Been running since." Charlie's voice broke. "My sister. She was one of them. Mary Dunn, 18, gone in that fire. You knew and didn't tell me." Ellen flinched, tears spilling now. "I tried, wrote you, but the letter came back. I was scared, Charlie. They'd have ruined me. Or worse." Clara stepped in, her nurse's calm cutting through. "Let's get inside, all of you. This is too much out here." She herded them toward the lounge, the aurora forgotten as the crowd dispersed, whispering. Peggy's mind spun. Ellen, Charlie, the fire, a tangled knot from 50 years ago, unraveling now under Seaview's roof. In the lounge, a cozy room with overstuffed chairs and a crackling fireplace, they sat. Peggy, Ellen, Charlie, Clara, and Elsie, who'd insisted on staying, her rosary trembling in her hands. The air was thick, the weight of decades pressing down. Peggy broke the silence, her voice sharp but shaky. "Why come back now, Ellen?" "After all this time." Ellen pulled a crumpled photo from her pouch. 3 girls, arms linked, grinning outside the cannery. "This," she said, sliding it across the table. "Found it last year, cleaning out my attic. You, me, Mary. Happiest summer I ever had till it wasn't. I'm dying, Peggy. Cancer, 6 months tops. Needed to make it right." Charlie's hands clenched, his voice raw. "Right? You let me think it was an accident. Let me bury her with no answers." "I know," Ellen whispered, her head bowing. "I was a coward then. I'm here to face it. Face you both." Elsie spoke, her voice cue Avery. Jimmy. He was trouble, always was. Drank himself dead by 75. If he did it, I'm sorry. For Mary, for you all. Peggy stared at the photo, her throat tight. She'd mourned that summer, too. Lost friends, lost innocence, but she'd buried it under years of grit. Now it surged back, raw and real. You should have stayed, she said, her eyes on Ellen. We'd have backed you up. Would you? Ellen asked, her voice breaking. I was nobody. Poor, scared. You had folks, Peggy. I had nothing. Clara, silent till now, intervened. You're not nobody now. You're here, facing it. That counts. She looked at Charlie. Mr. Dunn, she's dying. She's not hiding anymore. What do you need from this? Charlie's eyes welled, his voice a rasp. I needed to know. Why Mary died. I've carried that whole 50 years. He paused, then softer. You're carrying yours too, Ellen. I see it. The room stilled, the fire's crackle the only sound. Peggy reached for the photo, her fingers tracing Mary's grin. We were kids, she said, her voice softening. Stupid, brave kids. Maybe it's time we let 'em rest. Ellen nodded, tears streaking her face. I'd like that. Elsie clutched her rosary, whispering, For Jimmy's soul, and theirs. Charlie exhaled, a shuddering breath, and Peggy felt something shift. A knot loosening, not gone, but lighter. Clara stood, her nurse's practicality kicking in. You're all staying here tonight. Guest room's free, Ellen. No arguments. She glanced at Peggy. You okay with that, boss? Peggy smirked, a faint echo of her old fire. Long as she doesn't snore. Weeks later, Seaview hummed with a new quiet. Ellen stayed, her days numbered but full. She shared stories, mended fences, sat with Charlie by the cliffs, watching the sea. Peggy softened, her barbs gentler, her walker a bridge between them. Elsie prayed, her guilt easing, while Clara chronicled it all, finding purpose in their patchwork healing. One morning, under a gray sky, they scattered Ellen's ashes where the aurora had danced. Peggy, Charlie, Elsie, Clara, a handful of others who'd heard the tale. The wind carried her away, a whisper on the tide. Peggy leaned on her walker, her voice low. We got it wrong back then, but we got it right now. Charlie nodded, his eyes on the horizon. She did too. The home stood stronger, a community forged anew, not in fire, but in forgiveness. For Peggy, it was enough, a lesson late but lasting, that the past can weigh you down, but the present can set you free. One tide healed old wounds. This tale proves that forgiveness can light the darkest skies. If Peggy's journey touched you, drop a like to let us know. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that mend the heart. What would you carry from Ellen's return? Share your reflections in the comments below. We're all listening. Until next time, hold this close. The past fades when we stand together.